Thank you very much for those exceptionally kind words, but then what should I expect from a brother? It is a pleasure for me to be here as your guest speaker this evening. Let me just say that the first time I spoke at a Rotary Club event, that was sometime in the 90s. My speech got me into a lot of trouble with the then president of our country. The title of my speech then was, "Poverty breeds social unrest. You don't help the poor by punishing the rich." Those of you who are old enough will remember that the only independent newspaper then was the Free Press. And the Free Press carried an editorial with the title, "The Golden Words of Sam Jonah." As it turned out, that wasn't particularly helpful. Let me say that in preparing my speech, then and now, I took inspiration from your four-way test. Is my speech going to be the truth? Is it going to be fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? I'm happy to say that that is what guided me as I wrote the speech. The late Tiny Rowland, who I worked for, once told me that there are three circumstances where you can tell the truth without fearing the consequences. The first one is that if you are Mahatma Gandhi, you have no interest in the material world, so you really don't care. The second one is if you are Rockefeller, you are so wealthy that you become untouchable. And the third one is if your doctor has told you you only have 3 days to live. I would like to add a fourth, and it is this, that when you have reached my age and you have serious concerns about the future of the next generation, it would indeed be irresponsible not to speak up. Ladies and gentlemen, let me start off by saying that as a frequent traveler to many African countries, I must admit that it would be hugely unfair not to acknowledge the progress this country has made since independence. That said, we must guard against complacency and must be on the alert to any challenges that undermine the gains we have made. Given our endowment, both human and natural, we can and should do much better. In any case, the point ought to be made that we really ought not to take comfort in comparing ourselves to the rest of Africa. We must compare ourselves to the rest of the world. And it is in that context, ladies and gentlemen, that I'd like to share with you my reflections on the challenges that can be an impediment to our country's progress if not addressed with urgency and determination. A lot of what I'll be talking about is not new to any of us. Indeed, there are things we all matter about at home and when we meet friends, but we are reluctant to articulate them publicly. In this regard, let me make the observation that in a large measure, our attitude is informed by partisan reasons or fear of recrimination. Of course, we've all been witnesses to how political parties use the social media to unleash their attack dogs on critics. The fear is real, but I'd like to state without equivocation that in succumbing to our fears, we actually make matters worse because impunity and mendacity will reign supreme. As the saying goes, fear is the path to the dark side. We must therefore find our voices, otherwise we become okay with the ills of society or we become powerless. Either way, we will be the worse for it. A wise man once said that the necessary condition for evil to triumph is for good people to remain silent. So whatever we do, we must never keep quiet about the problems we face, the solutions to them, and the prospects for a better future. Indeed, in his inaugural address in 2016, our president, Nana Akufo-Addo, entreated us to be active participants and not be mere spectators in the affairs of our country. Ladies and gentlemen, I will start off by talking about that which concerns or ought to concern all of us, and that, I must say, which keeps me awake at night. And it is about the state of the economy and its prospects going forward. As an investor, I know that I know what an economy should look like to attract the necessary investment for national development. Available data indicates that for the first quarter of 2020, our GDP grew at a rate of 4.6%. It contracted to 3.2% for the second quarter and minus 1.1% for the third quarter, giving an average outturn of 0.2 for the 3 quarters of the year. COVID, of course, played a large role in it, and one ought to recognize that. For the same period in 2019, the economy grew at a rate of 6%. At the end of the third quarter, the industry sector contracted at minus 3.1, while services grew at 1.9. Only the agriculture sector increased in its growth rate, recording 4.5% at the end of the third quarter as compared to 3.7 for the same period in 2019. This is telling us something, right? Even though government revenue exceeded the revised target for the year, expenditure also exceeded the revised target, leading to the end of the year fiscal deficit of 11.7% of GDP. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the most alarming aspects of our macroeconomic situation is the debt crisis. At the end of 2020, total public debt reached 291.6 billion Ghana cedis, representing 76.1% of GDP. A nominal increase of about 149.3 billion since January 2017. In 2018, the debt to GDP ratio was 59.1%, increased to 62.4 in 2019, and to 76.1 in 2020. New bonds have since been issued. The domestic debt component is 51.4% of total debt, while external debt is 48.6%. Of course, we all know the effect this has on asset to credit by the private sector for investment. But the bigger question is how all of these debts are going to be paid. This question is important because if you look at our expenditure profile, the top two items are the emolument of government employees and interest payments on existing debt. Thus, we are borrowing to consume and to service existing debts rather than for productive investment. Ladies and gentlemen, in 2020, the emolument of government employees represented 28.3% of total expenditure, while interest payment amounted to 24.6% of total expenditure. Capital expenditure, which we will need to build roads, schools, hospitals, and the rest, was only 12.1% of total expenditure in 2020. And this is not abating soon. In fact, this year, the budget estimates indicate that interest payments would exceed even emolument of government employees to become the #1 line item in our expenditure profile. This is why some economists argue that the ratio of debt servicing capacity to debt stock is a better measure of sustainability than debt to GDP ratio. But let me just say this is for another discussion when you invite me back. Ladies and gentlemen, let us look at the key drivers, the main drivers of the economy and their prospects going forward into the future. Let's take mining, for instance. And here, I like to refer to gold mining because it is the most significant mineral in the mining sector. Like all minerals, gold is a depleting asset. It is irreplaceable. Not too long ago, South Africa was by far the biggest producer of gold in the world. Indeed, in 1994, out of a total global production of 81 million ounces, South Africa alone produced more than 20 million ounces, representing 25%. Ghana then did not even register as one of the major producers. In 2020, South Africa's share of global production is only 3%, and it has lost the top spot even in Africa. Ghana now enjoys the enviable position as the biggest producer in Africa. But let's ask the question, 40 years from now, who can say for sure we will still be producing gold here? As for our newly found dual, oil, as we all know, a lot of countries are talking about green energy and alternatives to fossil fuels due to the phenomenon of climate change. Most countries are making plans to ban or phase out the use of fossil fuels in the near future. So 40 years from now, what will be the demand for oil? That is, if we still have some. Meanwhile, remittances from Ghanaians in the diaspora, which is one of the main sources of foreign exchange for Ghana, is also at risk due to major generational changes. 40 years from now, it is not certain whether the next generation of Ghanaians in the diaspora will feel so attached to families here as to be sending money to take care of them or build houses here. To put it in context, this source represents a significant part of our national income. Ladies and gentlemen, I recently read about a rather disturbing information about cocoa. The Chinese, having polluted our rivers through illegal mining activities and having, in connivance with some Ghanaians, acquired large tracts of farmlands in the cocoa growing areas, have started producing their own cocoa. Their illicit mining activities release mercury into the soil. Mercury is indestructible, and traces have been found in some of our cocoa beans. What this means is that even our traditional source of revenue, from which thousands of farmers obtain their livelihoods, is no longer secure, as we risk losing the premium quality of our cocoa. This is a terrible prospect, and it is one that must be tackled with a renewed sense of urgency. Ladies and gentlemen, the inevitable conclusion from all of this is that the sustainability of our current sources of revenue is under threat. We are borrowing huge sums of money for our children and grandchildren to pay, yet we are not seeing realistic strategies that assure us of our capacity to pay back. Are the 30-year, 40-year bonds going to be paid? I'm afraid unless there are clear plans to ensure that the economy creates jobs, reduces poverty, and improves upon the quality of life of the average Ghanaian, a sense of helplessness and hopelessness will be the lot of our children and grandchildren. The debt will suffocate them. And that is my concern, and that also keeps me awake at night. The question should be asked, how do we avoid this situation? Well, in my view, we can only do so through massive investment in all sectors of the economy. And so I will now put on my investor cap and ask questions which my brother Pamna would ask. Given that I have a choice in where I put my money, what would I like to see in my country to make it the preferred destination for the next AC Mall? Every investor has a choice. Every investor is nomadic. They will go to where the greener pasture is. So I'm asking you, if you are an investor, what would you like to see in a Ghanaian business environment which will make you want to put your capital here? We are all, quite rightly, celebrating the good news of Ghana being chosen as the host of the Africa Free Trade Secretariat. And the government should, quite rightly, be commended for this remarkable development. However, let me just say, we can only realize the full benefits if we become the most competitive economy on the continent. I'm afraid, sadly, we are nowhere there. We have a lot of work to do to attain this status. Indeed, a research and advisory firm, Confident, just yesterday reported that Ghana fell short on almost all the AFCFTA competitive indicators. These are cost of credit, cost of power, productive capacity, customs efficiency, trade logistics, and dependency on foreign inputs. Investment promotion, ladies and gentlemen, is like a beauty pageant. The reward goes to the country which is adjudged to be the most attractive as an investment destination. What conditions create the conducive environment for investment in any country? I'm sure you'll be asking. Well, let us look at our situation. One of the key considerations for investment is governance. And since 1992, we have elected governments to steer our affairs. But the very nature of our democratic setup, in my view, is our undoing. The three arms of government are like a tripod. For stability, each leg must have enough strength to stand. In our system, one leg, the executive, has more strength than the other two combined. In fact, the two seem to derive their strength from that of the executive. That's weakening checks and balances. Any party that comes to power has absolute power to do whatever they want. The 1992 Constitution is the basis for the current democratic dispensation. It created a monstrous executive which looms large over the other arms of governance structure. And for 28 years, we have failed to make any meaningful changes to strengthen our democracy. Actually, what we have, if you pardon me to say so, is an executocracy, not democracy. The president is supposed to appoint the majority of his ministers from parliament. So you and I, by definition, that makes parliament a rubber stamp, because no MP in the ruling party will be able to stand up and demand accountability from the executive. They are all scrambling for positions. The judiciary is no different. The president has a determining role in the appointment of all the judges of the Supreme Court, including the Chief Justice. This festers the perception that the situation compromises the impartiality and the independence of the judiciary. Indeed, the last section of the citizenry believe that the judiciary is not impartial, with 85% of Ghanaians in a recent Afrobarometer survey perceiving the judiciary as corrupt and ineffective. My own personal experience with the judiciary is that of frustration, lengthy and costly proceedings. Some lawyers take pride in being masters of legal gymnastics. Every opportunity to delay cases are seized upon. The commercial courts, which were set up to speed up the dispensation of justice, have become a huge disappointment. Disputes involving land overwhelm the courts. Land acquisition is the most important factor, but now I will tell you, in investment decision making. Any prolonged litigation over land frustrates any investor. Indeed, it has been said that the enclave that houses the Lands Commission, Lands Evaluation, and Title Registry, these registries, is arguably the most corrupt enclave in the world. It cannot be good for investment. But corruption pervades all aspects of our governance structure. A few years ago, a prominent member of parliament said publicly that parliamentarians take bribes to pass bills that favor their sponsors. Ladies and gentlemen, if a fish comes out from water to tell us that crocodile has one eye, who are we to doubt it? Incidentally, the said MP is now the Speaker of Parliament, Honorable Alan Barkley. Our governments, all the governments, we've had pay lip service to anti-corruption, but I'm afraid do very little substantially to cure the canker. Which of the major corruption issues has been conclusively dealt with since the Fourth Republic began? There have been many corruption scandals and none have been conclusively dealt with. I could give you a long list of unresolved corruption cases, but there's no need to bore you with something that we are all familiar with. As a friend of mine will say, the problem with corruption is not the absence of laws, but the certainty of punishment. Sadly, there's rather certainty that corrupt people, especially in high places, will never face punishment. And this has bred impunity in those who rather take it for themselves through dubious means than serve the common good. We cannot go anywhere if this situation continues. No country can develop without dealing decisively with this canker. Days ago, we read shocking news of 2 teenagers who were arrested for killing a 10-year-old boy for money rituals. This sparked extensive discussion on mainstream media as well as social media. Many Ghanaians were expectedly shocked that children of this age were so moved by money that they allegedly killed a human being to get it. But ladies and gentlemen, if we were to reflect, we will know that this was merely a symptom of a much more deep-seated problem with the entire Ghanaian society. When our children watch TV, what do they see? Too much religiosity without morality. Pastors displaying uncouth behavior, stepping on pregnant women, slapping congregants, people showing how money can be made without hard work. And when they copy what they see, we appear shocked. Let's stop the pretense. Ladies and gentlemen, what is baffling is that those who used to have voices on these things seem to have lost their voices. People speak on issues based on who is in power. It's our definite silence suggesting that we are no longer concerned about issues that we complained about yesterday. The molestation and in some cases assassination of journalists, murder of MPs, corruption, the harassment of agents. We have just finished another election, the 8th in the series since the beginning of our Fourth Republic democratic experiment. As usual, the accolades came from all over the corners of the world, and we took them with pride, as we should. But we failed to tell the world, what we failed to tell the world is that some people lost their lives in the course of the election. Ladies and gentlemen, for me, no election is as important as to warrant the loss of even one life. And the silence over it is numbing, as it gives the impression that it is okay and it is to be expected. No, it is not to be expected. It is not okay. Let me say that one of the saddest moments for me was after the State of the Nation address, when a prominent MP was asked why there had not been serious outpouring of grief about the death of the innocent people in Techiman. His response was that as far as he was concerned, they were undeserving of any sympathy because he saw them as armed robbers. For me, that was a new low for the country. We also witnessed, arguably, the biggest assault on our democracy since the beginning of the Fourth Republic. When on the eve of the swearing in of the president, at a time when there were no ministers, and crucially, let me repeat, crucially, there was no Minister of Defense. Armed soldiers, that is to say, officers from an institution that works by command, invaded our parliament, and up to date, no serious answers have been provided. This could have been grave, this could have had grave consequences for the future of our country. The least of that we deserve is a public inquiry. Have we become so numb to these things? Ladies and gentlemen, the indiscipline on our roads has become a nightmare. Last year, 1,115 people lost their lives or got seriously injured due to road accidents. A 22% increase over 2019 figures, according to the Bureau of Public Safety. For the first 3 months of this year alone, more than 700 people have died from road accidents. By comparison, the COVID-19 has killed 760 people over a 1-year period. Ladies and gentlemen, clearly, indiscipline on our roads is far more deadly than the coronavirus. Our media landscape is so polarized and partisan. There is hardly any objectivity because a lot of the media stations are owned by politicians whose interest is in swaying voters one way or the other. Independent media practice seems to have faded, and journalism has become a conveyor belt for political propaganda, insults, and acrimony. What is the status of the role of the media in holding the executive, judiciary, the legislature accountable as the fourth estate of the realm? Is it enough to just report issues? Where are the investigations? Where are the facts? These are the hard questions that the media must ask and reassess its role in shaping our country's future. In the past, when all else had failed, academia was the last vanguard. We all remember the role that the Legon Observer played. Under the hallowed cloak of academic freedom, men and women of conscience could write and speak words that penetrated the halls of power. It appears to me that in recent times, in our Fourth Republican dispensation, the courage to stand up for the truth and the determination to uphold the common good seems to be missing. In our dark moments, it is concerning that the voices of the intellectuals are receding into oblivion. Sadly, it is a consequence of deep partisan polarization of our country said that everything is seen through the lenses of politics. It appears to me that the culture of silence has returned, this time not enforced by legal and military power, but through convenience, parochialism, hypocrisy, and lack of conviction. Where are Dubois Haynes and PV Obens, PV Hamses, I should ask. Ladies and gentlemen, where do we go from here? If you were to listen to the voice of the over the hill, the over 70s, we've seen it all. What will be the advice for the future of this country? Well, this is the advice of the over the hills crowd who have been of service and are very confident that a word to the wise is enough. First, to have a meaningful democracy, we cannot continue on the path of a tripod with one leg stronger than the other two combined. We must commit to review the experiment with the aim of strengthening accountability and ensuring that democracy delivers real development to the people. Democracy is meaningless unless it is capable of improving the living standards of the people and providing decent living conditions, or at least the very poor in our society. To achieve this, our constitution must be revisited. Secondly, we must reevaluate the structure of our economy. Ladies and gentlemen, no country has attained the height of development unless the major drivers of the economy are owned and controlled by the citizenry. Take a look at the major drivers of the Ghanaian economy in the financial sector, the mining sector, construction of major projects, telecoms, oil and gas, insurance, etc. These are often predominantly foreign-owned, and Ghanaians own very little in these sectors. For example, according to Pricewaterhouse report 2019, June 2019, only 9 out of 23 Class 1 licensed banks had majority local ownership, with the rest being majority foreign-owned. In the mining sector, Ghana has more than 20 mining companies at various stages of operation in the country. As far as I know, no Ghanaian businessman or woman has 5% of the ownership in any of these mines. This situation is not different from what obtains in the oil sector. I note with some satisfaction the efforts of the government to empower Ghanaians in the economy. In this regard, I pray we learn from the experiences of Malaysia and South Africa. In Malaysia, ladies and gentlemen, the promotion of what they call the Bumiputra, Malay sons of the soil, policies as an attempt to empower local businesses in an affirmative manner led to massive corruption and cronyism. South Africa's Black Empowerment, Economic Empowerment Program suffered the same fate. Even though these programs are well intended, their implementation gave room for political patronage and clientelism, leading to consequences noted above. We must therefore be guarded in the implementation of this initiative. We can empower our own people without creating seasonal local entrepreneurs through political patronage or create loot and share schemes disguised as investments. Tribal and ethnocentric considerations, family affiliation, and friendship must not be the defining routes to gain business opportunities. Third, we need to develop our industrial base. We cannot develop by importing almost everything from food to toothpick. The one district, one factory flagship initiative is laudable, but quite frankly, we need a lot more than that to develop an industrial base. And by the way, where's the industrial base of foundation laid by Kwame Nkrumah in the 60s? At the time, there was an understanding there were no Ghanaian businesses with enough capital, businesses with enough capital to venture into certain businesses. So the state took it upon itself to drive industrialization and build a foundation for takeoff. Accordingly, according to some records, well over 100 factories were set up across the region, producing imported finished product, producing almost everything we needed at the time. Today, we still export many primary commodities and import finished products for consumption. From 2010 to 2019, we spent $3.9 billion importing processed rice, mainly from Asia. That is an average of almost $400 million or more than $2 billion cedis a year. Over the same period, we spent $2.5 billion on sugar imports. That is about 13 billion cedis. Ladies and gentlemen, this cannot continue because all of these things can be grown here. The last but not the least, we must completely overhaul our education system. I am not talking about the duration of school. I am talking about the equality of education and the prioritization of what our children are taught. A useful education system must be able to groom young people to believe in themselves and to have the necessary skills and attitudes to form an effective, efficient labor force. As the legendary Dr. Kwesi Aggrey opined, our education must train the heads, hands, and heart of our youth. This calls for not only science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but also vocational and technical education. Our inordinate obsession with degrees and certificates has turned most of our graduates into certified unemployables, hardly suited to the needs of industry. Are we preparing our graduates for the new skill sets needed for the future? That is why I have never understood the kind of logic that informed the conversion of polytechnics into universities. Technical and vocational education have been crucial in Germany's development. Let us relook at our priorities and reform the education system, shifting away from grades and certificates to technical know-how, values and attitude building, an educational system which inculcates into our young people flexibility and adaptability, communication and emotional intelligence, creativity and innovation, as well as ethical leadership skills. That is the only way we can compete in the 21st century. And from my own perspective, we don't lack the human and material resources to create that kind of system. We must shape the future we desire for our country. In conclusion, the older folks remember the inspirational lyrics of the wonderful high life music, Work and Happiness. It is characteristic of the times in which it was produced. Today's music, well, maybe I'm too old, but one, I can hardly understand the lyrics or what they are supposed to be to inspire. A contemporary musician, Adangba Hareba, asked a good question, which I'd like to ask all of us. Who will say the truth? On that note, I urge all of us to speak up for the good of our country, now and in the future. A wise man once said that the necessary condition for evil to triumph is for good people to remain silent. Thank you very much indeed.